Hello and welcome to another How to Code Well web chat. Today we're going to look or talk about the best way to learn programming, and this is off the back of a question that I got from a chap called Alex Craven. He messaged me or sent me a comment, or commented, I should say, sorry, on a video that I did about the top 5 web programming languages to learn in 2017. I'll put a link in the description, probably up here somewhere. And he asked about the best way to learn JavaScript, and he offered a couple of resources: Treehouse and YouTube. So I just kind of wanted to talk about the best way to learn programming, because it's a topic close to my heart, and there is I'm a bit ranty about how to learn programming, because I think that a lot of people are told one thing, and perhaps that's not the right thing that they're being told. So I do forgive me for this rant, but basically my stance on this is that there is never going to be a best way to learn programming, because the best way is often the wrong way for someone else. There are so many ways you can learn programming, and often certain ways are tailored for certain types of individuals. Some people, for example, let's just list some ways that we can learn programming. So we've got courses. We've got courses that you pay for. We've got courses that you look for free. There are YouTube videos that you can watch, for example, my tutorials, or other people's tutorials. There are conferences that you can go to, and there are pre-recorded or conferences that have been recorded that you can watch on YouTube and other channels and so forth. You can talk to people, you can go to these networking meetings and talk to other programmers, meet them down the pub or whatever, these social groups and so forth. So there are quite a few ways to learn programming. Of course, there is the academic way. You can learn programming from university or college or whatever. Again, that is paid for and so forth. Or you can learn on the job. So you can become an intern and learn as you go. So there's an awful lot of ways to become a programmer. And like I said, some of these ways are tailored for certain types of individuals who learn differently. So, for example, you might find that you prefer to go to a course, or sorry, not a course. Let's get onto courses later. You might prefer to go to a conference and listen to a speaker talking about how to do X, Y, and Z. Maybe it's a talk on HTML5 or JavaScript, and that might be great for you, because you might be able to just sit and relax and listen and absorb the information that's being told to you. It doesn't work very well for me, because my mind gets blown pretty quickly when lots of new ideas get thrown in, and my mind kind of goes into some sort of weird sort of like place where I'm thinking of all the applications that I'm currently working on or have worked on, and then relate that to what the speaker is saying. So I'm actually focusing on those bits rather than actually focusing on what the speaker is actually saying at that time. And therefore, I'm not actually absorbing the raw information that's being told to me. I'm actually processing that information in a completely different context. Often when I come away from a conference, my mind is completely shot, blown, and I may have forgotten a large portion of what was mentioned. I do like conferences where you can actually go away from the conference with a handout with some documentation of what the speaker was talking about, because then I can use that as reference material. The big win for conferences is the fact that there's a very social, engaged sort of event. You're in a room full of people probably asking a similar, or if not more complicated question than you are in their heads, and you can meet them after the conference in perhaps a less formal, more social manner to talk about what the speaker has mentioned. So that, conferences are really great, but for me, if I'm learning something, say if I'm learning Docker, for example, bits of Docker and all that kind of stuff, I find that watching the conferences on YouTube far better, because I can play and pause and stop and rewind at my own leisure, and you can't do that obviously in real life. And also, the person at the conference, excuse me, has a projector behind him and he's projecting some code, then again you can use that as reference material also by pausing and rewinding the video. Now, other people might find that watching videos is more of a problem. Maybe they don't absorb the videos as well as absorbing perhaps a book. I love videos, and I do videos myself. I've learned a whole lot of stuff from YouTube and Vimeo and so forth. I love listening to people, who are further up in the field, far further up in the field than I am, and gaining experience from listening to what they're talking about, especially when they're working on projects that are, have a huge amount of scalability issues, performance issues, and so forth, or challenges, I should say, rather than issues. So you're gaining that kind of experience from the things from their experience, which I really love. I also listen to a lot of podcasts. So when I'm working, I've got this kind of podcast thing going on. I've got a series of podcasts that I listen to on a daily basis or a weekly basis. And I can listen to them and just have them going on in the background. It's a bit like having a radio. A lot of them aren't necessarily talking about how to do a new technology. It's more about their experiences with the technology, which is great. And going back to books, a lot of people like reading books. Now, I'm not a fan of learning through or learning technical stuff through a book, because whenever I read a book, my mind goes into the whole sort of, read it like a storybook type way. And you can't do that with technical documentation. I can't just sit and read the whole book in 1 month from start to finish and everything in between gets absorbed. That doesn't really happen. I've got lots of books here. I've got lots of PHP books. I've got lots of Symfony books. I've got my LPIC book behind me. And I use them purely for reference material. So perhaps I haven't read all of them from start to finish. I've certainly read large chunks of them, but it's only those chunks that I've read that have helped me at the time. So, for example, with my LPIC book, using that for example here, there's lots of Linux commands and how to do certain Linux tasks in that book. So when I'm coming up against an issue, a challenge with Linux, then I'll refer to that book and I'll use the index page and the glossary, the context page, and so forth. And I will read the chapter on the topic that I'm working on. But I won't suddenly go, okay, I've read that chapter now, so I'm going to read the next 3, unless it's really interesting at that time. But so I just use that as an answer to the problem that I have at that one time. A bit like how I use Google, for instance, or Stack Overflow, because it's answering that one particular question. And again, moving on to the web, we have this fantastic resource, the internet, that has so much knowledge that yes, it's probably not organized in such a great manner, but it's certainly a really valuable resource, especially things like Stack Overflow and other bits and pieces. So there is a whole vast array of ways that we can learn programming. Now, my beef I've got with courses is that they teach you, they have a prescribed set of things to teach you. So, for example, on the first day they might teach you, or the first hour they might teach you variables, then they might teach you arrays, then they might teach you objects, and so forth. Okay, that's all well and good, and I've been on some fantastic courses in my experience, but the one thing that they often don't teach you, and this also goes for online courses as well, is how to actually debug and manage errors. Okay, because if you go away from a course and all you've learned is those prescribed things, and then you go and do something off book, off plan, and break something, you don't have the knowledge to then go ahead and fix it. So you need to understand things like error logging and debugging, and using tools such as Xdebug for PHP, or using the Web Inspector for JavaScript, using things like Postman to run AJAX requests or HTTP requests in general. And often those things don't get taught. Which is a shame, because they're so important for programming. People think that, okay, I know how to do variables, arrays, and objects, and that's all I need to worry about. But programming is so much more than just the constructs of the language. It's also how to deal with the program when it fails, and you gain so much experience from breaking things. And really, the best way I would say to learn programming is just to get out there and try it and break things, break a lot of things, because programming is one of those things that you will learn in slightly a different manner to other things in perhaps your education that you'll learn, because it's something that you can actually break and fix and mend, put back together again. And when you break a program, you often expose portions of that program, and when you expose those portions, you can then research what those portions do. So, for example, let's use Symfony for instance. Symfony, the PHP programming language. The Symfony, the PHP programming framework. All right, the web framework, Symfony. So it's got its own lovely little stack trace. In fact, most PHP frameworks have their own stack trace. In fact, PHP itself has its own stack trace. You do something wrong, that gets printed out in an exception message. If you're using a framework like Laravel or Symfony, then it gives you a lovely stack trace, a dump of what happened, what was being processed before the error, which is great. Okay, because usually 9 times out of 10, the stack trace will offer you or expose portions of the framework that you haven't directly touched. And so what you can do is look at those files, and they give you file paths and line numbers often, and you can look at those things and research those things, actually investigate how the application got to that point, how the program got to that point, how that web page was executed and got to that point and failed. You come away, I mean, that takes a long time, right? Because you've got to do a lot of investigation work, but the end result is not only being able to fix the issue, because you found wherein lies the error, but also you've come away with more knowledge, you've gained more experience of the framework itself, because you've read that file that was executed before the exception, and therefore you gain some experience, you gain an appreciation for the framework. And often when you come across similar errors, you can kind of in your head map together how the framework is actually hanging together, and it's a beautiful feeling when things just suddenly click, and you look at a piece of a file, a Symfony file, a reference to a Symfony file that references perhaps a Symfony component, and then you read about that component on the web, and you understand why that component was used and how that component was used, and perhaps why your thing triggered that exception. But again, like I said, stack traces, debugging, console logging, IDE debugging, profiling doesn't normally happen or get taught to you in a course, unfortunately, which is a great shame because you learn so much from just trying something out, breaking it, and then learning how to put it back together again. So I want to kind of finish this rant on the academic side because I've learned programming from both the academic side as well as from the non-academic side. So, for example, I learned PHP. I taught myself PHP before I actually went to college, went to uni, and then got put on the PHP courses. So I went there with a bit of understanding of PHP, but from a level of just knowing what I needed to know at the time, rather than the whole academic side. So the point I'm trying to make, and I'm probably making it quite badly, is that you don't necessarily need to pay anyone to learn how to program. However, the courses that you go on, whether it be a college course or whether it be a university course or whether it's just a programming course, an evening class, or just someone who is focusing on a language perhaps, they will give you some knowledge, some really good, gritty knowledge about the language that perhaps you won't know if you just learn it off of your own bat. Because when you're learning things on your own, when you're self-teaching yourself, you're only teaching what you want to know, what you need to know at the time. Whereas when you're on a course, you get taught, and the lecturer will ensure, hopefully, if he's a good lecturer, that you are fully comprehend the language or the portion of the language that that is being taught to you. It's very easy when you're self-teaching to just skim over a couple of bits and pieces that you think at the time aren't necessary, but are actually extremely important. So, yeah, you don't need to pay anybody. The point I'm trying to make is you don't have to pay anybody to learn to program. In fact, if we use the JavaScript thing, JavaScript language, for instance, every computer that comes with a browser and, I don't know, a text editor, you can write a JavaScript application, right? You can write HTML. Connect it to the internet, go through W3C schools, and there you know how you have a grasp of how to create a website, a basic HTML and JavaScript website, and even CSS as well. That's all well and good, but if you want to learn some advanced stuff by someone who knows the language inside out, then yeah, pay him to teach you. In fact, I have taught people myself. I've taught various people from across the world using things like Skype and remote control and so forth, RDP and all of that stuff. But I'm probably selling myself short here, but what I'm trying to say is that you don't need to initially pay anybody to start to learn to program, especially JavaScript and HTML and CSS and so forth, because you can download the IDEs for free. You can you've got a text editor and you just have to save it with the correct extensions and so forth. It's when you want to up your game, it's when you want to progress in the field that you should perhaps think about paying to get a lecturer, maybe go to a college course, or maybe pay a personal tutor to teach you some advanced topics. Also, they're great because they can watch you whilst you program, and they can suggest things that are perhaps not even on the course. Maybe you're using a wrong shortcut key or whatever, and all of that kind of stuff. It's experience. That's what you gain from going on courses. It's the experience, and it's learning from the experience of others. You don't necessarily do that or can gain that from reading a book or watching videos. Well, I suppose you could, but yeah, it's it certainly has its place. Paid programming, paid tuition has its place. But if you're starting out, if you're just starting out, then there's no reason to just try and jump in and get a feel for it. But my best way of learning programming is to break things and to try and fix them, because you learn so much more about the application. And you've got to be persistent. You've got to have some sort of you've got to persevere, because it's pretty it can be quite a laborious task to keep hitting the same issue again and again and again, and you're working out why on earth this thing is broken. But keep persevering, keep researching, keep checking out the videos and the Stack Overflow posts and stuff like that, and talk to people. There is no stupid questions, there's only stupid answers. If you're in a room full of programmers, right, so if you're in a conference and you go and meet, maybe you go and meet in a pub, or maybe you're a junior developer and you're working in you're an intern, right? So going back to the intern stuff that I mentioned right at the start, if you are stuck, you are probably stuck on something that is actually quite a simple thing. And there's no disrespect here. It's just because you are green, you're a junior, right? But if you're in a room full of senior devs or lead devs or just people who've had more experience than you, then do ask them a question. Do not fear knowledge, because if you can get something done quicker, you're going to show your employer that you're valuable to the team. If you just sort of like huddle away in a corner and worry that if you speak up and say that you've got a question about something, that they are going to look down upon you for asking that question, then then that's wrong. You need to ask the questions. You need to absorb the answer, and if possible, get them to show you how to do something. That would be great. But I'm going to leave it there because I've gone off on a little bit of a tangent. But do break things. Do just jump in and try things out. I'm not going to suggest looking at Treehouse. I can't, because I've never done it before. I've never used Treehouse before. I'm sure it's, well, I don't know. It might be good. It might be bad. But I can't say, and I won't say, because I don't have an opinion on it because I've never used it. Yeah. Anyway, thanks for watching. Do like the video if you found it helpful. Share it around if you think others might do as well. If you've got any comments or questions, bung them down in the comment section below. Maybe I'll be able to do another video off the back of one of those questions, like I've done with this one for Alex Craven. Thanks again for Alex for asking the question. It's a very important question to ask. And yeah, subscribe. I'm going to be doing a couple of videos coming. There's going to be a couple of videos soon on various things. I'm not going to divulge too much what they are. We're still going to be doing some Docker tutorials, but after that we're going to mix it up a little bit and do something else. But do subscribe to pick them up. Thanks again for watching, and I shall see you again in face-to-face form like this next Friday. Cheers. Bye.